Welcome in to the Lucas and Lucas podcast. Lucas, Frankel, Mike Lucas here with you on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon in December. And Mike, I got to give myself a big round of applause. I once again nailed the college football playoff rankings 1 through 4. I admit that I initially tweeted out something that didn't end up being true, but I rectified the situation, tweeted out my correct 4 at about 2:36 a.m. on Sunday morning. I tweeted it again on Sunday at 11:45 a.m. to reiterate this is the 4 that it's going to be. And it's just crazy to me, Mike, the amount of experts and pundits on social media that believe that they know what's going to happen and the amount of people that are wrong in this scenario, it's unbelievable. I commend the committee for their way of thinking and for always agreeing with me. It's amazing that so many people in this world disagree with me, but the one organization I can count on year in and year out is the College Football Playoff Committee. After I thought about it at 2:36 a.m. and I went Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama, it made too much sense. It was a flawless 4, and the fact that the committee agreed with it is just a cherry on top of another wonderful college football playoff selection, the final one of our 4-team playoff.
Yeah, I mean, it played out exactly how we said it was last week.
No,
Florida State had to mollywop Louisville, but they didn't. And the fact that Alabama beat Georgia, I mean, you get credit for putting it out there, Frank, but I think it was a pretty easy decision. I think it sucks for Florida State. I get why Florida State fans are upset, but the reality of the situation was the committee's job is to put the 4 best teams in the college football playoff, records be damned. And they felt as if Michigan, who hadn't lost and beat some real teams, was the best. Washington, undefeated Pac-12 champion, playing at full strength, who just beat an Oregon team who was on the precipice of potentially making the playoff, was second. Texas had to go ahead of Alabama because they played head-to-head earlier in the season, and Bama lost at home to that same Texas team. And then it came down to Florida State, who had no losses but doesn't have a quarterback, or Alabama, who now has the best win of the entire college football season. And they went with Bama, and I think it's the right choice. And I get why Florida State fans are upset. I understand why they feel cheated. If they win their bowl game and want to claim their national champions, I have no issue with that. But it was the right decision. I thought it was an easy decision. I actually don't think it was that difficult.
I mean, I wouldn't classify it as an easy decision. I mean, it's pretty hard to leave out an undefeated Power 5 champion. The reason why you do it, though, is because they had listen, the reality of the situation is Florida State having an opportunity to show they were one of the 4 best teams in the country with, Rodemaker and whoever they started against. I don't even know.
They didn't do it.
They had an opportunity to make a statement against Florida, which they didn't, and then against Louisville, which they didn't. So this notion of they did all they could do is, to me, is not accurate, because they had an opportunity to do what Texas did. And I do believe, Mike, that if Texas didn't lay the hammer down on Oklahoma State, then the 4, even with Alabama winning, might have still been
Florida State,
Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Florida State. I still believe that if Texas didn't, the last few games especially, do what Ohio State did in 2014 or 2015, if they didn't go out there and just lay the smackdown, then I truly believe that Florida State would have gotten in. And the whole, and I wish it wasn't the case, but the reality is they couldn't ignore it. And is Texas's win over Alabama was so you can't establish a precedent of the head-to-head unbeaten, head-to-head record, and that's where it would have gotten real murky for the committee, as if Texas struggled against.
I agree.
Oklahoma State.
Frank, I think if the committee had truth serum, and they were to actually rank these 4 teams, take everything else out, you go Michigan, Washington, Bama, then Texas. But because Texas beat Bama head-to-head, you cannot put Alabama ahead of Texas. So I really think Florida State, despite finishing 5, if they had got in, let's say Texas in this scenario had barely squeaked by Oklahoma State, it would have been Bama 3, Florida State 4. Bama would have been the 3. You just can't put them ahead of Texas when they had the head-to-head loss. I'm with you, man. Florida State had 2 opportunities to show that even without Jordan Travis, there wasn't a significant drop-off, that the team itself was better than just the quarterback. And Florida State's a good football team. Even without Jordan Travis, they're a good football team. But the committee's job is to put the best 4 teams in the college football playoff. The best 4. And I think they nailed it. And if anyone should feel slighted, it's Georgia. I think Georgia has a bigger gripe to be left out of the Final Four than Florida State does.
And that's what my initial four was Michigan, Washington, Alabama, and Georgia. But after thinking about it, it's like they just, as much hate as they got for leaving Florida State out, if they would have put Alabama and Georgia in over Texas, I feel like that would have been a way worse situation for the committee in terms of the backlash they would have gotten, because the Texas fans would have been like, hey, we beat this team. How could you put them in over us? And we won our conference championship, and we did it in a way more convincing fashion than they did. So, like, as much as I agree that the four, quote unquote, I mean, you could argue that it's hard to argue that Oregon is like one of the four best teams, but like Washington, if you like watch them all year, I don't know how close you watch. I had to watch all their stupid games because they played at 10:30 p.m.
I still think Oregon's better than Washington. I know Washington beat them.
It's so weird. Oregon dominated every single team that listen. I guess they didn't play a ton of great quote unquote great teams, but they dominated everyone they played, literally besides Washington. Washington struggled against so many teams this year, but so many of their games came down like the last possession of the fourth quarter, and they managed to just squeak in somehow, which is why they've literally been underdogs in every big game they played. And every time you think they're out, they like rise above, which is why it's really hard to count them out against anything. And looking at their bowl game against Texas, they're underdogs again. So I think
Bama and Texas win. I think we have a 3-4 championship game.
Who's your national champion?
I'm picking Bama.
I feel like I was the first one on the Alabama train, but now everyone else is on it. And I do believe that the reality of Alabama is that they were a 4th and 31 Hail Mary, just improbable.
But listen, Frank, Texas needed a 4th down overtime stop on the 1 yard line against Kansas State 3 weeks ago. Like, it wasn't like Texas blew everyone out down there. They blew out Oklahoma State in the championship, but they had a couple close calls. They barely beat TCU. TCU's been atrocious this year. Like, it's not like Texas was just on a rampage. Look at their schedule. I think 3 of their last 4 games were single-digit points, and 2 of them came down to the final play. So I see you scrolling on your eyes.
I'm just double-checking Texas' schedule. Rice 37-10 beat Alabama. Cruised over Wyoming. Crushed Baylor. Crushed Kansas. Lost 34-30 to Oklahoma. Only won by 7 over Houston, who was terrible this year. Crushed BYU, beat Kansas State in overtime. I don't remember what happened. That was the Malik Murphy game.
That was the game that went to double OT or overtime, and Kansas State went for the win from the 1 and got stuffed.
Only beat TCU by 3. Only beat Iowa State by 10, and then crushed Texas Tech 57-7, and then crushed Oklahoma State. So, I mean, so they laid the smackdown at the end when recency bias, I guess that's the reality is the committee values recency bias, and the way you look at the end is definitely a big benefactor to that. And I do feel bad for Florida State in the other sense that if Jordan Travis, he laid out in his tweet, if he would have gotten hurt 6 weeks ago and Florida State managed to win all those rest of the games that they did, then they probably would have made it. But the fact that he got hurt so late in the season, they were unable to build that sort of momentum offensively, really hurt them. So it is what it is. But
last thing on Florida State, getting left out the way they did is actually the best thing ever for them.
Right.
Because for the rest of history, Florida State fans would say they were robbed, they were screwed, they would have won. And there's no way to disprove that.
Well, if they beat Georgia, if they beat a Georgia team that plays their starters, then yes, they will have every.
Ohio State already has 23 starters who are not playing, or 23 guys who played this year in the portal / will not play in the bowl game due to draft eligibility. Georgia's not like none of these guys. The bowl season's destroyed if you're not in the college football playoff. None of these teams want to play. So I don't even look at that game against Georgia as any validation and/or vindication for either side, whether they should or shouldn't be in. But if I'm a Florida State fan for the rest of history, if they lose that game, Georgia, and guess what? We would have beat Michigan, and now we don't even have to play the game. So I could just say it, and you can't tell me I'm wrong because we don't know.
I mean, yeah, I do agree in the sense that it is good in the sense that now we have this sort of unknown about what they could have done. And yes, you're right in that regard. But I do believe that if they end up losing their bowl game or get crushed in their bowl game, which who knows who's, like you said, who's going to play, who's not going to play. But if they lose their bowl game, then that argument's already out the window. If they win their bowl game and look great, then the
Florida State fans would say we didn't care. Like, we missed the playoff. This was just consolation. We didn't even give it a real effort. Like, that's why the bowl games are stupid. You can't judge anything on a bowl game that wasn't a college football playoff bowl game. So
and Florida State would have gotten destroyed if they played against
yeah,
Alabama, Texas, or whoever they would. Michigan. If any of those three teams would have crushed Florida State, it would have been a terrible game.
that's
And
what I'm saying. That's why Florida State's lucky. They don't have to actually watch their team get destroyed. They could just moan and complain that they got left out. When in reality, had they been in the playoff, they would have got smoked.
Yeah, it would have been horrible television, kind of like the national championship game last year with TCU. But that's beside it. I mean, you can't really hate TCU because TCU got in and they won a game. So, but moral of the story is Florida State would have gotten waxed, and glad we don't have to deal with it. The other big story turning the National Football League was the whole Zach Wilson saga. There was a report that surfaced from Diana Rossini saying that the Jets want to go back to Zach Wilson, but Zach Wilson's reluctant to start again because he's scared of getting hurt, or that probably doesn't like the situation around him with the offensive line and weapons around him. Robert Saleh later denied this, but let's be real. When there's smoke, there's fire. What do you make of this whole report that's going on about Zach Wilson?
I think it's hysterical for two reasons. First, I get where Zach Wilson theoretically is coming from. It's really from his mind, he wants to get a new contract. He wants out. If he gets hurt, it's going to be even more difficult. The offensive line's abysmal. The receivers are abysmal. So from his standpoint, theoretically, I get it. But here's what I don't understand. Zach Wilson is essentially no good tape on film. Nothing out there about Zach Wilson screams, give me a chance to come in and compete for a starting quarterback job or even a backup quarterback job elsewhere outside the Jets organization. If I'm Zach Wilson, yeah, I know I could get hurt, but you could also put together a game or two where you don't have to be that good to be the best quarterback the Jets have had in a month now. You just have to be not the worst quarterback in the NFL. And I think Zach Wilson can do that. And at least if he comes back and shows the mental toughness and fortitude to man up, go out there, take a couple hits and play maybe even just decent, just halfway decent. Because of his draft status, he'll get another shot in the NFL somewhere. So if I'm him, put me in, coach. I think it's a bad look for him to say, I don't really want to play from the competitive standpoint, but I do. But that's understand what he's coming from.
But that hasn't been proven. Robert Saleh denied that actually happened. But I actually do believe that Zach Wilson probably said to somebody, a teammate, we're hearing it's Aaron Rodgers, that he was reluctant to start again because he's scared. Which is like, that to me is one of the biggest like red flags about a professional athlete you could possibly have. Like, for example, not to like make this like say that Tommy DeVito is going to be like a Hall of Famer, but Tommy DeVito, like, if you tell him that he has an opportunity to play for an NFL team, he is running through a glass wall to get that opportunity. Zach Wilson's like, he sees the glass window, is like, oh no, that looks dangerous. I'm not sure if I want to do that. And that, like I said, Tommy DeVito might never start again after this week, but that's like, it's so much about being a competitor and an athlete. Not that I have ever been a competitive athlete, but I believe it's about the mentality that you have. And look at Jake Browning was, I believe, a Heisman finalist at Washington. Goes undrafted, and then last night had the highest completion percentage ever for a quarterback in his first or second start in the history, like 85.6%. Like, it's just crazy. And also look at Brock Purdy, the new NFL MVP favorite, plus 300. Mr. Irrelevant is now the favorite to win NFL MVP. And then the Jets get the Zach Wilson guy, who's second overall pick, all the hype in the world, and can't hit water if he fell out of a boat. It is so hard to judge who's going to be good at quarterback and who's not, which we already knew, but which is why I almost believe it's so much about like mentality and mental toughness. And I think it's just clear at this stage that Zach Wilson just has none of that. And I hate to like hold this report against him, but I do think he should start because it just literally have no other options at this stage of the game. But I do believe that there is some sort of truth to this, and the Jets have to. This is like the nail in the coffin to me in the Zach Wilson experiment.
Well, Frank, we're not necessarily athletes, but if you got a call from ESPN tomorrow and said, "Hey, we need a spot fill-in producer for NFL Live," you're moving hell high in water to get to.
Well, the money's got to be good. It's not just like
no. Like a 1 day thing. Like, hey, we need you for 1 day to come fill in here, produce this show. You're not passing up that opportunity. No way. I know you. I'm not. if NBA Today called or TNT was like, hey, we need you to fill in, produce for Chuck and Ernie and Shaq, you're there. Like, you're not thinking twice. There are only so many opportunities you have a chance to seize. And Zach Wilson has a chance with 5 games left in the season to theoretically start 5 games in a row in the NFL, put together something that would make other teams outside of New York say, hey, we think we can resurrect this guy. The talent's there. There's a reason he was drafted 2nd overall. We haven't seen it yet, but let's maybe blame the circumstances instead of the player. And to me, looking at it, despite knowing and understanding where he's coming from, I think it comes off as soft. And I know I don't want my quarterback shying away from the moment. Because in the 4th quarter, when you're down a score, the quarterback has to be the guy to seize the team rallying together and come through when it matters most. And if there's a guy out there, in this case, we'll use Zach Wilson if the report is true, who doesn't even want to be on the field because he's scared of getting hurt, I'm not sure that guy has the mental makeup to be a true franchise quarterback when we already have the entire last 3 seasons to know it's probably not there to begin with.
Yeah, Zach Wilson's a catastrophe. I'm also glad that we're never going to see Tim Boyle ever again. I don't think he ever makes an NFL roster again because the Jets cut him today.
Oh, they did.
They did. Tim Boyle is gone.
I can't. He was the worst quarterback I've ever seen. Yeah. Literally the worst quarterback I've ever seen.
Like, hard to believe that guy actually made the NFL, but all the power to him for even, carving out a career for him and lasting for, 18, 19, 20, 20 for like 5 years in the league. That's a hell of a lot longer than me or you could say, or a lot of other athletes could say to be on an NFL roster for that period of time. Very impressive. Last couple things before we go. Brock Purdy, NFL MVP favorite. Do you believe that he is worthy of that award? And I guess if you had to bet right now, who would you bet on to win MVP?
I feel like it's going to end up being Dak Prescott.
But if the Cowboys lose to the Eagles and the Cowboys don't beat any legitimate team this year, then I don't see how he's got to. If Dak's going to win MVP this week, if Dak beats the Eagles this week and has a great game with 4 touchdowns, no turnovers, and the Cowboys win, then yes,
which he's been doing. Which he's been doing. That's not out of the question.
But he hasn't done it against any of the good teams this year. The Cowboys they're 9-3. They lost to the 49ers and the Eagles and the Cardinals. Every other team they played is crap. Giants twice.
I get that. But Frank, it's also Dallas Cowboys. And you know how this award is half a narrative award as it is with anything else. And Brock Purdy is more, I would say Brock Purdy's more likely based on schedule to play lights out the rest of the season and take the award. But I wouldn't bet. I would not advise anyone to bet. I don't like any of the odds at enough of a pace or rate to seize this. Dak's been playing out of his freaking mind the last 6 weeks. Unbelievably good football from Dak Prescott. That offense is humming. San Francisco looked unbelievable on Sunday against Philly. I'm not as high on Philly as their record would indicate. I think they have a lot of holes defensively. And Jalen Hurts is taking a step back from his season last year. So if I had to bet today, I'd bet on Prescott. I don't love the odds, but Brock Purdy's just a damn good quarterback. You can say anything you want. Understand he's got the best system, the best weapons. His offensive line's really good. When Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel are healthy, this is an elite offensive football team. And maybe Brock Purdy isn't the kind of guy who can carry a team like the Jets to the promised land, but he's a really good processor. He makes the right decisions, and his arm's way better than he gets credit for. And if he's your quarterback in the right scenario, he is absolutely good enough to win a Super Bowl.
I was just trying. You mentioned because he's on the Cowboys and he's a shoo-in to win it or has a much better chance to win MVP. I'm looking at NFL MVPs. I'm trying to figure out when the last time a Cowboys player won NFL MVP.
Detroit Aikman won one? List of NFL MVPs.
Unless did Emmitt Smith win one? Emmitt Smith won in 93. He's the last one.
Yeah, 93 Emmitt Smith.
And I believe he might be the only one in history, only Cowboy in history to win NFL MVP. So it's only happened once. So this notion that because he's on the Cowboys and he has a much better chance than everyone else.
I was saying they get the extra push, the extra narrative. It helps. So,
but I also argue that they get criticized more too. Anyway, the Cowboys' remaining schedule they got Philly, then they have the Bills and Dolphins. All right, so this is and then the Lions. So this is a 4-game stretch here. I guess 4 really, really good teams for Dak Prescott to show what he's really made of. And there's reports that he's going to become the NFL's highest paid player again over the offseason. But like if he crumbles again in this stretch, I almost feel, and they'll probably end up still paying him, but like how many more years do we have to see of Dak Prescott failing? But then again, the other side of it is that if you go off him, what's the alternative? And is it getting a guy like Zach Wilson and being worse than ever? So like that's the tough spot you were in for the Cowboys. So that it would be hard pressed to say that Dak Prescott can take you where you want to go. But what's the other side of the grass? It's not necessarily any greener at all. That's why it's so hard, like because that like Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, it's hard. The chances of you actually winning a Super Bowl with those guys is so slim, but they're much better than the alternative. So it's hard. It's a hard situation.
This should be the year that Tyreek Hill wins it.
I've been aboard the Tyreek Hill train for a long time. I feel like he's completely transformed the offense, and I'm shocked right now that Tua actually has better odds to win MVP than Tyreek Hill right now.
Crazy. It's crazy. Is Tyreek Hill, Frank, the most dangerous offensive weapon you can ever remember your team having to go against?
I mean, prime Randy Moss, elite.
Okay, in the last 10 years. I mean, I guess prime Randy Moss is in that same category, but like I can't think of a guy that if my team's playing, I've been more scared of on a play-to-play basis than I am when the Giants or the Browns or whoever's playing Tyreek Hill. Every play.
I mean, Bill Simmons said he's the 3rd best receiver he's ever seen.
Yeah, I don't think that's that crazy.
I don't think it's that crazy either. I would have to think. I mean, in terms of a non-quarterback playmaker, the only other ones I could think of would be like McCaffrey, Calvin Johnson.
Travis Kelce always scared the crap out of me. He's not in the same cat, but like he just always was a guy that scared me. Brian Westbrook as a Giants fan.
Oh.
No, I'm not saying on the same page. I'm saying guys that I was scared of. Like Westbrook always seemed to kill the Giants.
It's not necessarily I'm like afraid of him. It's just crazy how so often he gets so wide open. It's like, how is he not triple teamed on every single play and you just take him out of the game? It's just crazy that even like he's getting the ball and no matter how much you try to stop it, he always manages to get so wide open that it just boggles your mind. That's what amazes me most about Tyreek Hill is that they're going to him deep and he always manages a way to find space and get open. It's unbelievable.
He should be the MVP. Honestly, he should be the MVP this year. It should be Tyreek Hill. You tend to agree with me way too much on stuff. Like at work, I was getting in shouting arguments with people over Florida State, like why they shouldn't be in. I'm literally arguing with our bowl bracketologist, telling him that Alabama should be in the playoff, and he's telling me no. You know what that means, Frank? It means you're smart. It means you're smart.
But like in the college, and I was trying to argue like last night about Tyreek Hill, and I was getting like shut down by our host and our analyst.
There's no one in the NFL this year. If you take them off their specific team, that is harder to replace.
I mean, quarterbacks are pretty.
Well, no. Well, I understand it's a different position, but you look at Brock Purdy. The 49ers went into last season. They were pretty good with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like Brock Purdy was a 3rd choice there. Like, don't tell me that position in San Francisco is not replaceable. Granted, Brock Purdy's playing it at a higher level than Jimmy G ever did or anyone else in the Shanahan era. But they've had really good offenses in San Francisco with this Shanahan system with a rotating cast of characters at quarterback. Now, Purdy's the best of the bunch, but they've had success. You look at Dak. Like, Dak's been up and down. Cooper Rush won 6-7 games last year for the Dallas Cowboys when Dak was out. Did not play as well as Dak, but that offense can succeed. No receiver is ever as valuable as a quarterback. I get the premise of that. I understand the quarterback's the most important position on the football field, hands down, bar none. But look how Tyreek has helped Tua transform. Mike McDaniel deserves a lot of credit. And the Dolphins, a team that a lot of us, I think, thought could be frisky this year, but I don't think anyone expected 9-3, 12 weeks in being the number 1 seed in the entire AFC conference. The reason for that is Tyreek Hill is the most unstoppable offensive weapon in the game. And the best play that any team has in football this year is Tua taking the snap, doing a quick play fake and chucking as deep as he can. And even though it's coming to Tyreek, you can't stop him. If you take Tyreek off that Miami offense, it's still good. But the reason their running game is so good is you can't put extra guys in the box. the reason the motion is so dangerous is because you have Tyreek Hill, who's already the fastest guy in football, getting a running start, and you have to rotate. He's like Steph Curry. Like, you have to gravitate to Tyreek Hill, no matter where he is, which opens up everything else for the offense. Like, I'll disagree with you on the next topic, no matter what you say, just for the sake of disagreement, Frank. But I can't understate or overstate, how good Tyreek Hill's been this season and how valuable he actually is to the Dolphins' success. Everything they do offensively, everything is predicated on where Tyreek Hill is. And if it's not going to Tyreek, he's going the opposite way to draw 3 defenders to the right so Raheem Mostert can run left.
I guess the only thing I think about in terms of the Dolphins is if Zach Wilson's the quarterback of the Dolphins, what do Tyreek Hill stats? Like, I would love to see Zach Wilson in a situation like San Francisco or Miami, which I think you could argue probably the 2 best quarterback-friendly systems in the league right now. What would the worst one of the worst quarterbacks in the league look like in that system? Because I just feel like based on those weapons that those teams have, it's like almost impossible to fail. That's the only thing I would say in terms of that quarterback situation. I'm just annoyed that you agree with me on the college football playoff rankings, because like we could have had a really spirited debate about this, but you just opted not to, and I'm disappointed.
I could make the case for Florida State. Like, I'd rather make the case for Georgia. Like,
yeah,
if you really want to get pissed off, Georgia was the number 1 team in the country before the season. They had won every game. They hadn't blown out every team, but they
didn't. They only beat Georgia Tech by 8, and Georgia Tech was not.
I said they did blow out every team. They did not blow out every team.
Oh,
granted, but they still beat 3 top 10 teams. Their only loss of the season was in an SEC championship game on a neutral field to Alabama and Nick Saban. Okay, if Georgia was going against Michigan, guess who'd be favored? Georgia. If they were going against Washington, guess who'd be favored? Georgia. If they were going against Texas, guess who'd be favored? Georgia. If Alabama and Georgia played again, I still think Georgia would be favored. I think Vegas would put Georgia ahead of any other team in the country on a neutral field, which these bowl games are. And for them to get left out because their only loss of the season came by 3 points to Alabama in the SEC championship, the single best college football game of the season, you can make the case Bama and Georgia, the 2 best teams. For them to drop from 1 to 5, that's more absurd than Florida State not getting in.
Yeah, but I understand from, like, if we're throwing out resumes, conference championships out the window, and we're just picking the 4 straight up best teams in college football this year, I think it's Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, and then maybe Ohio State. That's probably the 4, if we're being completely honest.
Ohio State wasn't one of the 4 this year, no.
Then who would be your 4th? Michigan, Alabama, Georgia. Who's the 4th?
Texas.
You truly believe Texas is one of the 4 best teams?
I'd probably put Oregon, but Texas or Oregon.
But I mean, you can't say Oregon because they couldn't beat Washington.
Ohio State was soft all season. Like, trust me, Ohio State was not, like, their quarterback was just not good enough.
So I mean, it's a good debate about who the actual 4th best team is. You could make your argument for a lot of teams. I definitely don't think it's Florida State. I can see the argument for Texas. I can see the argument for Washington. I can see the argument for Oregon. The Oregon argument I think is the hardest one to make because they would have just beaten Washington one of the 2 games they're in. So, but they didn't. Anyway, I'm excited that we have 2 exciting college football playoff bowl games. I'm excited that they're not on New Year's Eve this year, that they're actually doing it on a day where people will actually watch the games. And
that's smart.
And hopefully the Yankees get Juan Soto and that Japanese pitcher. And I'm just the Juan Soto speculation has been going on for way too long. I'm sick and tired of waiting. Why is this taking so long? We're arguing about Drew Thorpe. And then we could play this podcast back in 6 years. Drew Thorpe has won 4 Cy Youngs in a row. I don't care. Trade Drew Thorpe. Get Juan Soto. The Yankees need a culture shock change to the system. Juan Soto is that fix. Brian Cashman, stop playing hardball and get it done. That will do it for this edition of Lucas Podcast. See you all next week when the Cleveland Browns lose to whoever they're playing, because I have no idea who's playing quarterback for them.